We are now going to move on to our first panel discussion of the morning, focusing on last mile artificial intelligence in pediatrics. I will be your moderator for today. My name is Keith Morse. I am a pediatric hospitalist at Stanford Children's and one of our medical directors for clinical informatics. In addition to being a co-site PI for PedsNet, as Dr. Forrest mentioned, I also focus on meaningful implementation of machine learning into pediatric care. With me today, I have the honor of introducing our panel. We have first Dr. Veena Jones, who is the medical director for digital patient experience at Sutter Health. Dr. Jones is a practicing pediatrician and a graduate of Stanford's Clinical Informatics Fellowship. In her role at Sutter, she supports the integration of AI-enabled digital tools, including a symptom triage checker. Next, we have Dr. Dennis Wall. Dr. Wall is a professor of pediatrics, biomedical data science, psychiatry, and behavioral science at Stanford University. He received a PhD from UC Berkeley in integrative biology, and his current research focuses on neurodevelopmental diseases of childhood, including autism and developmental delay. He founded a company, Cognoa, that uses AI-supported evaluation of video imaging to support the diagnosis and treatment of autism. Next, we have Nishith Khandwala. Mr. Khandwala is co-founder of Bunker Hill Health, a startup that supports the distribution and integration of AI algorithms into clinical use. He completed a master's in computer science at Stanford University, working with the Amy Center to evaluate medical imaging. His team developed an algorithm to evaluate and estimate the bone age of or the skeletal maturity of a pediatric hand radiograph, and they were able to successfully integrate that algorithm into 9 sites nationally. Finally, we have Dr. Judith Dexheimer. Dr. Dexheimer is an associate professor at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. She received a PhD in biomedical informatics from Vanderbilt University, and her current research focuses on methods by which machine learning can improve the patient-clinician experience. Past projects for her include integration of an epilepsy classifier into clinical care and the integration of automated triage screening tools into pediatric emergency rooms. Thank you all for joining. It's exciting to be able to have this panel with you all. Our goal today is to focus on last mile artificial intelligence in pediatrics. Last mile here refers to the final step of translational research, where an algorithm that has been developed and validated to a certain extent in the research environment is moved over and implemented into clinical care. This concept has other names: translational machine learning, AI deployment, AI integration, AI delivery science. And it is a notoriously difficult step because of the both technical fragility and the organizational complexity of our current healthcare system. You all know that the vast majority of algorithms are unable to overcome these challenges and never make it into clinical care, resulting in what Eric Topol has termed the AI chasm. To the panelists here, I, of course, have questions that I will be directing to individuals, but then if other members of the panel would like to chime in, please feel welcome. To our audience members who are joining us virtually, if you have questions, you can type those into the chat, and we will do our best to get them to our panelists. All right, to start us off, Dr. Dexheimer, can you share your thoughts on what makes integration of AI into clinical care so difficult?
I can. Thank you very much. And thank you for having us all to be able to talk about this in something that feels like a tales from the trenches approach to life. Like, this is what really happens inside the hospital. I think the most important thing about getting things into care is there has to be really, really good coordination between your information services or your IT systems, your research systems, and your end users. Integration is kind of difficult, partially because of both your typical implementation concerns in informatics, like the right people and the right person at the right time and the right information, but also on the machine learning side, because of challenges getting everything to happen real time. You need to be able to have the data you need with enough time to evaluate your algorithm to provide all of the information or your recommendation back to your providers when they're making that decision. So when we do things like implement the NLP, one of the problems that comes up that we don't think about until it's time to go in is that a clinical note is not available for processing until it's been filed or till it's been signed. And so typically we can't use those data to help you make a decision. We need to use just your past data to make a decision. And so we have to plan carefully and coordinate carefully before we can get things running in your clinic at the right time.
Wonderful, thank you. A quick correction for audience members who would like to submit questions. We have a link to a Google Sheet in the description that you can type your question in there. The chat function is disabled. All right, next, Dr. Jones, can you tell us your thoughts about, are there characteristics in pediatric care that make integration of AI harder than in adult care? And conversely, are there characteristics that make it easier than in adult care?
Good question. Well, first, Judith, I think you did a great job of kind of highlighting some of the, general challenges that I think absolutely pertain to the pediatric population as well. And, I think what I would add about our care of children specifically is that the models that are created, creating models in pediatrics are really challenging because we're talking about a really wide range of patients and ages and patients whose physiology varies so much, all the way from prematurity to young adulthood. I think kind of honing in on those varying stages and actually finding solutions that are applicable at the point of care are really challenging. And then I think the other piece about pediatric care is that shared decision-making is such a hallmark of how care is provided that a real implementation challenge comes when we try to use AI or ML or NLP types of solutions with the thought that they could in any way, replace that patient-provider relationship. And so I think finding ways for these to kind of augment our intelligence is what becomes really tricky. So I think those are, when I think about pediatrics in specific, I think those are some really relevant issues. In terms of what makes it easier, I'm not sure. I think I would love to hear what other people here think and what you would have to say about it. In my experiences with working on implementing AI solutions, pediatrics is not the pediatric population is often not our first choice of where we try things out. I think, kids are not little adults, and there's a lot more experience with implementation in our adult population. So I'm curious what others think, but I'm not sure I have a thought on what makes it easier.
Go ahead, Dr. Dexheimer.
Oh, I was going to say the providers, because pediatricians are really, really friendly and forgiving.
I like that.
And Dr. Jones, to your point about the sort of multiple growth stages that obviously patients go through during their development, and the classic example is the overlap between pediatric sepsis and a crying infant, where heart rate going up, respiratory rate going up on a monitor, that those symptoms look a lot like what we would normally think of when an infant is severely sick or in sepsis. So it is often difficult to disambiguate those two in some sort of sustained programmatic way. Next question is for Dr. Wall. Dr. Wall, are there characteristics that can be incorporated into an algorithm's design at its initiation that downstream could help overcome some of these barriers of implementation?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me okay? Good. So I guess I'll speak from my knowledge base. We, as you mentioned earlier, started a company called Cognoa, and that company has produced a tool that's an artificial intelligence-based system for streamlining and enabling the diagnosis of autism, more in the general pediatric setting. And in the development of that, this is called Canvas DX, by the way. In the development of Canvas, we decided that it was critical for us to incorporate essentially an abstention feature into the AI. So where the AI would be willing to admit that it doesn't know, that it would be willing to abstain from vote in the presence of insufficient or noisy data. And I think that's critical. That's one important part that I think we need to begin to really embrace in the context of artificial intelligence as it translates into the clinical setting. The other is something that Vina just mentioned about making this a partnership between the AI engine and the clinical care practitioner. And that's very much what Canvas DX is meant to be, something that's utilized as a diagnostic aid, not as a definitive diagnostic, that's used in the context of the general pediatrician's evaluation of the child to streamline and facilitate their willingness to make a diagnosis, which is something that they don't commonly do today. For example, with autism, they prefer to refer to specialists, but in our context, we're hoping to enable them to react quickly within the context of the general pediatric visit through this abstention feature, which provides a sort of a safeguard against false reporting and a willingness for the AI to say, I don't know, as well as a support system that's quantitative that enables the pediatrician to make a good decision at the time of care rather than referring, which can create all sorts of weight and barriers to access to behavioral therapy that I think many of us know are really valuable and effective if delivered early when children are diagnosed early with autism. Those are two key things I can bring up. The third thing is the communication with the FDA is pretty much essential. And so with us, with Canvas DX, we've been in discussions with the FDA for a few years, actually, through the pivotal study design. And they've recently come up with a predetermined change control plan through a software pre-certification program at the FDA, which is really exciting, I think very pioneering on the FDA's part, to enable adaptive systems to be adapted, essentially, in a time frame that, is faster than the typical cycle of FDA approval, for example. So under this predetermined change control plan that the FDA has instigated, you're able to make modifications to your system as you go, let it learn, let it change and adapt, of course, with safety controls and safeguards against AI drift and other things like that. So that's a really exciting thing. And I think in that context, it enables us to be reactive to the age of the child and developmental level of the child. So Canvas right now is adaptive in the sense that it's able to make really good decision support for children between the ages of 18 and 48 months, and for children over 48 months to 72 months of age. So there's this bifurcated system where we can adapt quickly within the context of the child's age. But over time, you can imagine with this predetermined change control plan that there's going to be a lot of opportunity to make the AI better, to make the abstention rates go down, the determination rates go up, and things like that, all within the context of the timely development of the AI as it comes together with real world data. So those are my three answers. So it's like, make sure you're willing to develop AI that's willing to admit it doesn't know. Make sure you make AI that's willing to work together with the clinical practitioner, and make AI that's going to work with the FDA to be adaptive over time in a timely fashion, always improving towards the goal of, better diagnosis or better treatment.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Next question is for Mr. Khandwala. Your organization, your company works with organizations who are hoping to integrate machine learning. Can you share with us decisions that you've seen other organizations make that made this process of integration easier? And then, much like Dr. Jones, conversely, are there examples of decisions that organizations have made that made integration harder?
Absolutely. I think first it actually comes down to the AI algorithm, or any tool for that matter itself. The higher the utility that the change provides, the more stakeholder buy-in you will see, the more processes you will see being streamlined. So if there's a tool, for instance, like an AI algorithm that can impact revenue positively for the organization, or efficiency or patient outcomes by significant factors, somehow it just gets really easy to implement the tool, because everyone is working around with you there to actually implement the tool. And so first off, I would say that it just really greatly depends on the tool itself. As far as decisions on the organization's part, I think that there are policies and infrastructure decisions that an organization can make that really differentiate them as someone who is trying to sort of almost leapfrog into the future, as opposed to someone who will be more of a follower and just trying to see what change is being implemented. So institutions that fall more in the former category, you would see them make policies that just make all of these change management decisions a lot easier. So for instance, affinity to using cloud. Like, are you an organization that's willing to use the cloud, or are you trying to stick around and see if we can just go with the on-prem solutions as much as possible? Second would be on the change management side. Is there a project manager that can sort of coordinate different teams internally? Or is it more self-serve? Those would be conducive to change. The ones that wouldn't be where the clinical champion would need to sort of ask around folks, trying to figure out the process, and that just leads to a lot of chaos. So I think that, I guess in summary, there are three aspects I would say. One is on the tool itself and how much utility it provides. The second one being on just the organizational policies around the adoption of new technologies, and then finally, just the infrastructure that they have in place for implementing that change, both from an organizational behavior standpoint and also from a technological standpoint.
Wonderful, thank you.
And
Dr. Jones.
Heath, if I could jump in, I guess, a lot of what you just said really resonates with me as someone who works, on behalf of an organization and speaks with companies like your own and tries to make those decisions of, is this a relationship worth pursuing? And, should we engage in that first level conversation? What will it take to move it forward? And I think you're absolutely right. I think that first point of what is the utility? Like what can this solution, what can this tool prove, and how has it been proven to do so? So, okay, like in theory, you can improve outcomes. Have you been able to demonstrate that in any way? That's kind of one of the first questions that we ask, and we want to see that track record as much as we can, because to your point, right, it takes a lot to engage in a relationship. And so that proven utility is critical. And if there can be some sort of financial benefit to top it all off for the organization, then absolutely, like you hit the nail on the head, like that really makes a difference. And patient outcomes would be kind of the ultimate goal. And then infrastructure, I totally agree with you. I think organizations sometimes can step in their own way when it comes to adopting innovation. At the same time, I think something for everybody to be aware of is there are so many policies, legal decisions, contracting nuances, just barriers that can make this challenging. And so that partnership is super important. So just a couple thoughts to add, but I completely agree.
That's great. All right, next question is for Dr. Dexheimer. Can you share your thoughts on how you would define a successfully integrated algorithm? So what characteristics would have to be in place for you to think that an algorithm has overcome this last mile?
I think there are two answers, and they are very tightly related to the answers from the last question that Veena and Nish brought up with it. So from the research side, I think what we want to see is that we were able to provide the information to the provider making the decision prior to them making the decision. So we were able to see that our algorithm made a prediction, made a recommendation that made it to the end user, and the end user got to see it before they did anything. I think that counts as implementation into care, because everything is not going to change care, and that's okay. I think a true and wonderful algorithm success is also, of course, that you have changed the patient's care trajectory for the better. So you've improved the patient outcomes. I don't think that makes your algorithm not a success if it doesn't change the trajectory. But if it doesn't and you can improve your algorithm, I think you still have success on implementation.
And to sort of relate to our earlier presentation from Dr. Forrest, I suspect there's also a learning health system component to this, in the sense that you're never done, and there's always sort of ways to monitor and feedback and improve, just like we would ideally like to do with every element of our care, and machine learning is certainly no exception. All right, next question is for Dr. Jones. It's argued that reaching patients digitally, so via websites, patient portals, apps, is an easier avenue to operationalize machine learning to overcome this last mile. Do you agree with that, one? And then, are there areas in digital health that you think are particularly ripe for use of AI to improve pediatric care?
So I guess I'll answer this question from, what I would just like to call out as, in some ways, my limited experience with, with this and operationalizing AI, in my role. I think one thing that I can say is that I have seen some tremendous successes in operationalizing AI directly to the patient, and we have some experience with doing that. We launched a online digital symptom checker across Sutter Health, with a reach of over 3 million patients across Northern California. It's launched on our website and also accessible kind of before a patient logs into our digital portal. Interestingly, at this time, the symptom checker is available for use by patients over the age of 16. And so, we are not using it in pediatrics. But in the last several years since we launched it, and Dr. Morse was actually instrumental in some of the research that we did, kind of understanding the usage of our digital symptom checker. In 2020, I believe we had over 175,000 patient assessments that were performed using the symptom checker. And, we see usage patterns that demonstrate that patients are looking to this technology to help them at times of the day when they would not otherwise have access to a medical provider. So after hours, on the weekends. So, we've definitely seen some success there. I think to kind of comment a little bit on overcoming or on actually understanding success and whether or not or how our implementation has actually influenced or affected outcomes. I think that is, we're still working on understanding. And, a key piece that we're working on enabling to make that possible is actual integration between the symptom checker and our EHR. So, we don't have that right now, and therefore we don't have the ability to actively follow a patient's journey through our health system. The symptom checker can provide a differential diagnosis to our patients, and it can even provide, and it does provide recommendations, such as stay home and take care of yourself, or, go to an emergency department. But we currently, we don't have the ability to link what a single patient journey is through that. And so I think, our symptom checker actually just was launched in our EHR's App Orchard just this past month. And so that will be next step as we look to learn more.
Great, thank you. Our next question is for Mr. Kandwal. And so, do you think that the success of algorithm implementation is fundamentally a centralized problem or a distributed problem? And let me sort of flesh this out a little bit. Do you think the key to success of implementing of algorithms being successfully implemented is essentially relies on a good centralized development of an algorithm that is, quote, sort of good enough, sort of along the lines of traditional software, Microsoft Office, a good product? Or is it fundamentally a distributed challenge in that the end users who hope to use this product have to themselves identify solutions and learn to adopt a tool through tailoring it to their local conditions? Mm-hmm. You mentioned a little bit about this earlier in your point about algorithms that are designed to bring utility. Dr. Jones talked about utility that can be demonstrated as key, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about central versus distributed.
Yeah, I think there are two aspects to this. One is the machine learning component of how well an algorithm generalizes. I'll touch on that first. I think there's a spectrum of like having an algorithm that you train and test once, which just works out of the box everywhere. On the other side of the spectrum, you have algorithms that need to be fine-tuned or refined at every site to fit their population. I think the further that we are, or the closer that we are to the second one, where we need to fine-tune, I think that the more AI has failed to live up to its promises. I think it's somewhere in the middle where, let's say you start by training and testing your algorithm at, say, 4 or 5 sites. Now, when you're going to the 6th site, if that 6th site represents a site, it's similar to the first 4 or 5 sites that you trained or validated at. Great, you can try to make sure, you can try to just verify that it performs well, but for the most part, you can feel rather confident. But then when you go to the 7th site and you see that that 7th site is just in a very different population that is not similar at all to the first 4 or 5 institutions where you trained or tested your algorithm at, you might need to fine tune or tweak your algorithm there. So, if you consider, there are 6,000 hospitals in the US, what percentage of those hospitals would you need to fine tune your algorithm at? The smaller that number, the more AI has lived up to its promises. That's my opinion. On the second side, the second aspect of this is sort of integration into the existing workflows. And I think the best way to sort of convey my point is by using an example. Like, let's say you have an algorithm that can detect clinically relevant incidental findings. And it's best to implement this algorithm not through a standalone software that different teams in hospital need to adopt independently. What would be nice would be to integrate this algorithm into the existing workflow that might exist. So some hospitals might have like a patient navigator or like a nurse practitioner who's responsible for following up on incidental findings. Great, just integrate with the existing systems that hospital uses, as opposed to providing like a new web portal that some person has to get accustomed to and can only be used for your particular product. So I would say, as far as the machine learning component goes, make sure, try to get it as generalizable as possible from the get-go, and then refine as needed and test as needed. On the operational side of integrating an algorithm, it's best to do it as close to or as customized to the institution as possible, so that from an operational standpoint, there are as few changes needed to actually derive the utility that the algorithm promises.
Keith, if I could just add one thing, which is that, to Nish's second point, we have absolutely engaged with, vendors who have incredible technology, but whose technology does not integrate well into our existing workflows. And that can absolutely be enough of a barrier to halt progress. So that integration really, really matters, particularly, like an organization like ours, where we have over 5,000 providers. If we can't integrate and make it easy, I think Judith, you mentioned this earlier, right? Like easy and at the point of care, then it's just not going to, it could be insurmountable.
Next question is for Dr. Wall. Dr. Wall, what role do you see parents and families, as well as patients, playing in overcoming this final mile?
Coming again from the perspective of the Canvas DX system, this is very much a parent, patient, primary care provider partnership. So, it's meant to be something that's delivered to the parents. It's meant to be something with which the parents directly engage and about which they are, about which they know a lot and with which they are very comfortable. The system in which this, the Canvas DX system is working. So, it's really a partnership. I think the parents have to be on board and be working together with the pediatrician to provide the information that's needed for the algorithm to run. So it was always meant to be that, like where the patient and the parent are really the drivers and participate in the organic adoption really of the system itself, because of its ability to provide both a very robust diagnostic decision, but also the ease with which it can be used. So that's on the delivery of the care. The second part where parents can play a really critical role is in the clinical trials research itself. A lot of the work that we're doing at Stanford that's distinct from the translation of this Canvas DX product is in the development of novel therapeutic treatment modalities that engage parents really as the primary vehicle for treatment and delivery of that treatment. So these are game-based systems that work in the home that are meant to be used between parent and child to facilitate the treatment of, for example, autism and other developmental delays in ways that are fun, engaging, but highly effective. And so the clinical trials research that we do has to have that parent component to it very seriously integrated. They have to be on board. We find them in the crowd. They are essentially citizen scientists with whom we're working very closely as co-designers of these tools. They are the ones who help us decide on the user experience, including everything from imagery and colors and font choices to the flow in which the system works, and even all the way down to the earning systems that most incentivize their children. So to give you a quick idea, we've invented this game where it's just like heads up. You put the phone on your forehead, the parent puts phone on the forehead, and child is supposed to recognize a prompt, and it takes the form of essentially a very social charades-like game where the child's recognizing an emotion, for example, or a particular animal or a particular object, and trying to act like that object or express that emotion sufficiently enough for parent to guess. Really fun, quick, and we think very productive treatment that critically engages the parent and patients in the whole process. At the end of which we have not only a very robust game that's co-designed by the stakeholders, but one that's been tested as efficacious using endpoints that are the kind of endpoints the FDA needs to see to regulate or to clear the product for market release.
I like the use of the term citizen scientist. I think that's something that we can sort of lean into more. And
Yeah.
touched on briefly by Dr. Forrest earlier with the patient involvement. It's something that I think is unsurprisingly a theme in a day like today. Next question is for Dr. Dexheimer. So what are your thoughts about what skill sets do health systems need their employees to have to better overcome this last mile? Is this a question of more data scientists, more data engineers? Is this a question of more familiarity with machine learning by front-end providers? Is this a question of more citizen scientists, better patient education?
So I'm going to admit my own bias and say that we certainly need more clinical informaticists. What I think we need to get things implemented into care in a way that's useful is collaboration across the entire team. We need both the operational and research informatics to collaborate, because the operational side will be doing the implementation. The research side will be building and putting together the machine learning algorithms. The clinical side should be involved from the very beginning with both providers and some families, when you can involve families, so that they know and they trust their algorithms. They understand the output that's coming out. They know where their data came from. And then they know that when they implement it into care, they care about it. They can talk to their colleagues about it. They can act as champions for it, and that it will be more successful in the hospital in terms of your algorithm that's been built at your institution and been put in. I think you can make a laundry list where you say we need the IS and we need the IT team at the table. We need data scientists at the table. We need clinical informaticians at the table. We need clinician champions at the table. And then we need patients and families at the table. Everybody doesn't have to be there every time, but if you want something that is going to impact care in a positive way for everyone, I think making sure everyone gets a say in it so that they feel like they also own your product, they also own the outcome, and they trust it.
Wonderful, thank you. I love the idea of co-ownership. Okay, we are sort of getting close to the end of our session. I have one final question that I would like to address to all four of the panelists, and this is around sort of your expectations for AI in the future. So there's lots of talk about the current era of hype, and we have sort of a reckoning, this AI winter coming where reality is about to catch up with us, and we're going to realize that it's not as exciting as we've all thought. Presumably, when expectations and reality meet, we're going to have some sort of steady state, let's say in the next 5 to 10 years. What do each of you envision as the role for AI in pediatrics in that steady state? Is this something that is going to be largely a niche tool that is used infrequently, primarily in research, or is this something that is going to be a fundamental tool used by most providers during most episodes of care? I can, maybe Mr. Khandwala, you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Working on the pediatric side has always been a lot of fun. It's also even something as simple as skeletal age or bone age. One of the things that's very exciting is that you get to impact the patient at the very early stages of their life, which actually has like profound impacts into their later stages. I am optimistic that ML and pediatric use will be something that's used more widely than just for a small number of use cases and rather infrequently. But I think there are definitely many challenges that could prevent us from achieving that state. I think the first and foremost is just currently, I don't think there are any tools that have been FDA cleared on the radiology side of things for AI that work on the pediatric side. Like there are just no tools. And partly it's just because the market is smaller, it's harder to create an algorithm. And so addressing those challenges will be critical to actually achieving that steady state where AI is being used for routine care as opposed to only a small number of cases. I think this will probably require coordination between payers, providers, and AI algorithm developers, which is going to be an uphill battle, but I think that it's probably going to be worth it. There needs to be incentives, alignment of incentives between those stakeholders to actually make sure that these algorithms will be, one, used very widely in clinical practice, but two, also something that could give returns to the companies that are creating these algorithms for use.
Great. Dr. Jones, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think I, mostly agree with some of the sentiments already shared. I think I would hope that it is a tool that can be used in, various aspects of clinical care to augment, the diagnostic process, the treatment process for patients, and yet at the same time to not be thought of as a tool that could in any way, replace that patient-provider relationship, the importance of shared decision-making, the emotional connection that is so critical to the relationships that we create as pediatricians. I think that all said, there is a big role, and I think much of it is yet to be seen. So I can't wait to see where we are 10 years from now, and how we're using it.
Great. Dr. Wall?
Yeah, I think that the future is super bright, super exciting, especially in pediatrics, because looking right now at the current horizon, like Cognoa and Achille, for example, Achilles tool, Endeavor RX, game-based systems for treatment of ADHD that are adaptive in real time. These sorts of things are going to keep coming. I think there are also a few other examples like Mightier.com, Tally Health. These sorts of companies are working at the at the edge of this whole enterprise, and I think really are the pioneers, showing some of the capabilities of digital therapeutics in particular that have AI embedded in it, either as endpoints or as progress tracking systems, or used in the context of adaptively challenging the child in positive ways to make the game therapy much more effective. So I think just, these are kids, right? And children love games, and they're playing games anyways. And I love the idea of creating games that help them, that teach them, that educate them, that treat them. And I think that that's at least some of what's in the near-term horizon. And I think we'll set the stage for a lot more bright minds to jump in, clinical informaticians to jump in and do more in the field. And if you fix it early, the lifetime prognosis goes way up, positive prognosis goes way up. So what better space to be operating than in pediatrics for the development of artificial intelligence systems that are gamified, that are fun, but highly efficacious as treatments.
Great. Dr. Dexheimer?
So I think there have been some really excellent points already made. I think the only thing that I would add to that is that our truly sustainable AI and ML in care is going to be somewhat seamless, like your online shopping cart recommendation. It's going to be a tool that runs in the background, that the provider doesn't necessarily think about it being the tool they are using all the time. It just says, hey, I have a pretty good recommendation. And they say, yeah, okay, or, ooh, no. I think that's going to help with everyone getting to access it and getting to use it and keeping it going.
Wonderful. Well, we are at time. I want to say thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today. This has been a very insightful discussion, and we are lucky to have your diverse research, operational, entrepreneurial expertise to weigh in on this issue. Thank you to our audience for your attention. We are going to be moving on next to a break in our day. You have about 10 minutes. If you are all able to come back at 10:40, we will restart our programming then. Thank you all so much.